Dr. Teck, welcome again to today's News Talk TNT. How are you doing?
Good morning, Lembit. Many thanks for the invitation. I'm fine, thank you.
Well, and since you're a doctor, I believe your answer. So thanks very much for giving us a clean bill of health for yourself. Let's start by, in my view, one of the most interesting questions. How is it that you've become a pioneer for freedom? What journey brought you here?
Thank you, Lembit. It's very interesting. My whole life was centered around achieving, trying to do my best, and I chose medicine to do that. I became a GP after a few years of training in hospital circles, and it was very interesting because I took up a position in one of the poorest districts in the United Kingdom. So I started my general practice in 1982. Ran it virtually single-handed all the way until 40 years later. Now, about midway in my career, I started noticing that what I was taught and how I was brought up to treat people was starting to go off course. And I started to question why that was so, because quite often I would determine a particular treatment, a particular way of managing my patients. And I find a lot of times it was thwarted, and it wasn't long before I discovered that policies were at the root of a lot of my problems. Not money, not the patients, but the way health service was managed. So I decided to look into it and see how things could be improved. And I was very grateful that one of my patients, you probably know, she was the late Anna Pullen. Mm-hmm. She was the leader of the Conservative group in Leicestershire County Council. And she suggested to me that rather than fret behind a desk, that if I wanted to improve healthcare in a country, I should step out into the political arena. Much to my dismay, I said to Anna, my aim in life is to treat, not to take a secondary role. The years soon passed by, and eventually I took her advice, and I was introduced to the Conservatives because she was a Conservative. And it wasn't long before I got the badge on my lapel saying I'm a Conservative candidate. It didn't really matter to me which party I stood for. I was very determined to improve health. And I was also determined to see that other things were put right, because once you open the door of politics, there's a whole new world opening up to you. There are problems in other spheres that are not familiar with yours, not similar to yours, and it was a steep learning curve. Fast forward to 2019, when I lost my deposit in fighting for Brexit. I was about to give up politics, in fact, when a couple of older politicians said to me I should hang in there and support them, help them with health policy. And here I am today leading the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. That is a nutshell.
That's a very clear rendition, and it also is logical. In a way, it's a little bit similar to mine. I was in a very successful and very well-paid job, I have to say, for a large corporate multinational. I'd be a multi-millionaire by now if I'd stayed there. But I got persuaded to get involved in politics, and I didn't like the way things were being done. So I started doing them myself, became a councillor, and then I was really pushed into standing for Parliament in a seat that I actually won. So I relate to the fact that you can be drawn into it. We'll talk about the issues after the break, but I wonder what you think about this. In my opinion, there are two fairly distinct classes of politician. There are those who end up there because they want to see some particular changes. And then there's the other group, who I regard as an inferior group, who want to be politicians. So one group is outcomes-led. The other group is status-led. And the problem we've got in our country now is we've got lots of people who just wanted to be politicians. And I think that we've had a couple of prime ministers like that too. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What's your view, though?
I think you're perfectly correct, Lembit. I think people like me will lack the polish and the way some of these politicians behave, this so-called inferior class. One of the proof of my commitment and sincerity in politics is my late entry. So I have had a lot of time working with people, caring for them, to understand their problems, understand their anxieties, and know where the difficulties lie. I think that is a very important distinction. And I'm certainly not in politics for personal aggrandizement. I'm certainly here to see things put right. And it pains me a lot to see family members who are trained as doctors move away from this country because of the poor conditions of work, the assault on their professionalism and so on. No, I'm determined. I'm determined to help change the system. And I honestly and earnestly hope people will support the very honest and principles of integrity that I work under.
As I say, we will talk about the specific policy issues, including COVID. I'm interested to know your view on that in a few minutes' time after the break. But yes. Back to the process point, I want to get those out of the way now. I used to think, and I've said this before, and I say this with some humility, that politicians should only be politicians, that they shouldn't have other vested interests. I think I was completely wrong. I did that, by the way. I didn't have other jobs. I didn't have other significant employment when I was an MP. But then I had many years in the corporate sector before I went to be an MP. My worry is, Dr. Kong, that those who haven't done that don't have a stake in the game. They don't understand what it's like to be just about managing or defaulting on your mortgage, or having a fear about being made unemployed because your business is going down because of bad economic policy. Do you think that politicians should just be politicians? That's the class we have now. Or do you think that they should have a vested interest outside? It's a controversial question because there are a lot of people who say politicians shouldn't have any other job.
Not at all. You stated a perfectly sensible reasoning for having politicians who have had real life experience. Now, I know health is very much my area of interest, but I also have done work in other areas. And I think it's important that politicians should have a spell in the real world, learning about what it takes to achieve success, achieve the results they want to see in their field. I think in health, for example, we've had loads of Secretary of States for Health who have done no medicine at all, not even the front line as a nurse, a porter even. So it's not surprising that where they take briefs from so-called advisors, they miss the mark. And you really have to be aware of what you're doing, what policies you're setting, to be cognizant of people's real needs. Fully agree with you, Lembit.
The youngest age you're allowed to stand for Parliament at is 18 in the UK. Now, I used to be the youth affairs spokesperson for my party, and at the time I was saying we should vote at 16. That's because I think if you pay tax, you should be able to vote for the people you're paying tax to employ, essentially. But I wonder how much life experience you have at 18. Maybe I'm wrong. Put it in the chat if you think that life experience is less important than perhaps mindset. Fine. I don't have an objection to that minimum age because you get some very mature younger people. But I think that you get some very immature mid-30s and 40s politicians who just haven't seen life. Go to tntradio.live, put your views there. In a moment, I'm going to ask Dr. Kong about the actual specific policy areas, including about COVID and what he's campaigning for. But somebody who does want to debate with me is Dr. Teck Kong. Thanks for listening to that rather effusive response to my previous guest. Let's see what they say about you. We've talked about how you got into the political arena, Teck. What are your policy areas that concern you the most?
I think basically the profession is too heavily controlled and micromanaged. That's the first problem. The second problem is the use of... That's
the medical profession, you mean?
Yes. So that's a major problem. The second problem has to do with using financial incentives to achieve management targets. And that is quite often against the professional ethos. The third is obviously censorship. And there's a lot of censoriousness we've witnessed, for example, during this COVID regime. that goes against our ability to care for patients to the best of our ability, and in the interest of the patients, I beg pardon. So sorry.
Sorry, you went. But just going to go back to Dr. Kong in just a minute. Dr. Kong is essentially very concerned about. No, that's okay. These things happen. Just to explain, you're watching the Lembit show on TNT, and we're talking about what's got Dr. Kong into the political arena. And to summarize, it sounds to me that what's really bothering you, and I'm very interested in the third point you made about censoriousness, is the fact that there's meddling in your profession, which you don't think should be there. Is that one way of looking at it, the censorship? And what do you mean by censorship?
Yes, right. Sorry, I had an interruption. There were a few doctors who were suspended for daring to suggest alternative ways of managing COVID. I think there's a dirty word called ivermectin. But if you look at the scenario as it unfolded, the vaccine program was rolled out while the vaccine was still in phase 3 clinical trial conditions. And I do not think the clinical trial, I beg your pardon.
Don't worry, that's all right. I also want you to explain, what does phase 3 clinical trial mean?
Right. Clinical trials are divided into 3 phases before full licensing, and the clinical phase 4, which is post-marketing surveillance. Phase 1 is basically laboratory testing. Phase 2 is in volunteers. Phase 3 is in patients. And phase 4 is collecting data after it's been launched. I just want to bring up my Zoom again. Am I still on Zoom?
Yeah, we can see you. We can see you absolutely fine. Don't mess with it. It's working, Doctor.
Oh, right.
Don't fiddle with it. It's everything's fine at my end.
Yes, okay.
So I don't want you to take any risks there.
Right.
So trust me, you're a doctor.
Yes. So in phase 3 clinical studies, you collect data in terms of those what we call dose ranging studies to see what dose is the appropriate one to produce the desired effect. You monitor for side effects, you monitor for efficacy, and so on. So one of the key things about phase 3 clinical studies is safety monitoring. Now, when I was doing clinical trials as a research registrar in rheumatology, what we did was we checked people's eligibility to enter the trial. So there will be certain criteria. Does the person suffer the conditions you want to treat? So you select your patients to enter, and then you monitor the patient's baseline physiology. So you check for the heart rate, the blood pressure, the ECG, also all manner of things to make sure that they are healthy to start with. Because you want to distinguish whether you're achieving an effect or actually causing a problem. So they come in with a condition, they enter the trial, and you monitor them as the trial progresses with your medication. So you check them for blood pressure to look for any deviation. You check the liver functions to make sure the liver isn't affected, hematology, the bone marrow isn't affected, and so on. None of these things were prevalent during the administration of the COVID vaccine. So that's the first thing. The second thing on entering a trial is you have to offer people information so they can give you informed consent. There wasn't enough long-term safety data for people to give them consent, yet they were encouraged to take part in the vaccine. And if you know, the vaccine was rolled out under emergency use authorization, so everything was thrown aside. My own wife even had the vaccine and developed side effects. She wasn't told one thing about potential things to look out for, and she was never told to report back anything she finds adverse. Now that's very, very wrong, because one of the ethics from the Declaration of Helsinki is you monitor and you keep your patients safe. Nothing was present like that. If anybody dared to say anything against that and even mention anything as an alternative, they were being watched. Now, I was being watched because I did try one or two things to safeguard my patients, but it wasn't allowed. So I have colleagues suspended for daring to mention anything else apart from the vaccine. Anything that might hinder the vaccine program will be placed under scrutiny. Now, there are more ways to treat a condition than just vaccine. Why weren't we picking up things early enough to treat them in a conventional way? Why weren't we allowed to discuss other methods of approach? Why was so much money spent on the vaccine rather than treating the condition or any complication that might arise? And, you know, we were shown films of people suddenly collapsing on the streets, and we were told that was all due to COVID. There were huge anomalies, yet the people were subdued in questioning by not only censoriousness, but also by fear. Now, the doctors who participated in the program, the rollout program, I think they were financially induced to carry out the government program. This is what I touched on earlier on, that financial incentives should never be used to subvert professional ethics. The fourth thing is, a lot of patients who have had problems which they thought were due to the vaccine were not allowed to discuss it with the doctors. And in fact, some of my colleagues were very dismissive of the problems they were presented with when people were asking if there was a causal link. I have never come across in my lifetime of work where we weren't allowed to question causality with a medicinal product.
It seems to me that, first of all, your sage and very objective assessment I find persuasive, but then you're pushing on an open door, because I myself suffered, unequivocally, unquestionably suffered when I had the third vaccine jab. My friends had to help me out, actually, and I still think I've got after effects from then. What worries, so first of all, I find you're pushing on an open door with me, but what really worries me, Dr. Kong, is this idea of suppressing the dialogue. A lot of viewers have been brought to TNT because we are able to talk about it. And you get occasional fleeting side references in the old media, but they don't seem to be bold enough to point out that we have a massive, I believe, a massive health problem caused by the untested vaccines, or inappropriately and insufficiently tested vaccines. Is that where you stand on this, or am I going too far?
Yes. It wasn't very long into the rollout program when we heard about coroner certifying deaths as being caused by the COVID vaccine. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if a product is in phase 3 clinical trial, if it causes as much as one death and a legion of side effects, it should be withdrawn. Yet the government has the temerity to continue pushing the program. I wrote in the in an ordinary newspaper, the Daily Express, about my concerns about the vaccination being pushed to children. I see no reason to use it for children, for what is really a very, very mild disease at worst. But at best, they just brush off the problems with COVID. So why are we putting our youngsters at risk? That is something I really want to ask. But, you know, I had to tone down the article before it was published. We should have to do that. Professionals who have the patient's interest, doctors who have the patient's interest at heart, do not have to subordinate themselves to regulatory authorities. The only person who regulates a doctor's behavior is the patient. We have conscience and we have commitment to serve our patients. I think it's entirely wrong for the government to tell us how we should treat our patients.
So there was, to paraphrase what you've said, there was political intervention in medical decision-making.
Yes.
What do you think was the motivation? Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Well, there are various theories put forward. We know these products are being pushed very hard by pharmaceutical companies, in code with government. I think there is an awful lot of corruption going on. I need to be proven wrong, but it doesn't ring true at all. It doesn't ring right at all for me. I think we should be able to speak honestly with our patients, to discuss things in absolute transparency with our colleagues, what works, what doesn't work, what's dangerous, what's good for our patients, and so on. We shouldn't be censored at all.
A lot of comments coming in. Let me read some of them to you, Dr. Kong, including a very amusing one. When you had just a moment or two of problems with the internet, River asks, is Dr. Kong having tech issues? I see what you did there, River. Very good.
I like the point.
Yeah, it's good play on words. My name actually turns out to be an anagram of the phrase "I like to be MP." What are the odds? There we go. It was funny for 13 years before I lost my seat. Maybe for the best for me. A few comments here. Holly says, good job. We've got the MHRA to collect and analyze the data and be objective then. Not. And she's very critical of Dame June Rain. Then there is a comment here. We've all realized that these jabs were weapons, says Holly, rather sardonically, I think. No informed consent, she adds. Madrid suggests that COVID was a bioweapon designed to harm and kill. I'm not sure if I agree that it was designed to harm and kill, but it was certainly the consequence, I think. Sunday Girl, that's just my opinion, Madrid. That's my opinion. I'm interested in what Dr. Kong thinks about that. I'll ask in a minute. Sunday Girl says, first you do harm, unless you're getting paid £20 bonus every 5 minutes, of course. First, do no harm unless you're being paid £20 bonus every 5 minutes. So Sandy Girl suggesting there's a financial motivation there. Madrid adds, they're not vaccine. Mogden says, very convenient that everyone who collapses is being filmed. What's your view then? Do you think that there's a big financial motivation by the big pharma to get us to take the vaccines?
It's not a question I would answer directly. I think it's easy enough to say that pharmaceutical companies thrive on profit. Now, whether that's ethical or not, it's another question.
I worked for a large multinational which had a pharmaceutical wing, and I was obviously in the company and loyal to it. I thought they had very good values, and I met scientists who said many of us will never see our product, our vaccination or our cure on the shelves, even if we spent a lifetime upon it, because it's so difficult to make a successful and properly tested vaccine, for example. And they said, we accept that there are many people in this laboratory who will spend their whole life achieving no outcome apart from more knowledge. It doesn't seem that that was the way that was handled with COVID. It seems it was a long way off that. How long should they have tested a vaccine before they would have confidently been able to say it had passed all the stages?
I don't really know the answer to that. It must take years. But I can tell you, when I was involved in clinical trials, there were a lot of products that were trialed in phase 1, phase 2, and dropped. So the wastage of products coming on stream is huge. But for some reason, I don't know the basis for this, but the technology is such that they were confident they could speed up the process so much without paying due attention to the collateral problems. And that's my view. I really can't see how, for example, with this mRNA, we know it actually, to put in simple terms for your listeners, that it's supposed to get your body to make more copies and then antibodies built against it. Now, there isn't any way to explain what mechanism turns off the process, what protects this spike from actually attaching to various tissues, and for the body then to recognize it as foreign. There are lots of questions.
we'll come back to Dr. Teck Kong in just a moment. These are dark discoveries, dark revelations. Many viewers, you obviously already clued up with this. And many of you are saying, Lembit, 3 jabs, my goodness, they're using stronger language than that. Yes, 3 jabs. And I bitterly regret having taken this, especially because I had COVID, which I think was bad flu, and I recovered. So why did I end up toxically poisoning my body with stuff it didn't need? Well, I was traveling a lot at the time, and I went with the program, as it were, but I'm bitterly, as I say, regretting that now. After the break, I want to ask Dr. Kong what we should be doing about these matters and what he's doing to try to remedy what sounds like a gigantic global experiment that's gone horribly wrong. All of that on the Lembit Opic Show here on today's News Talk. Don't go anywhere. See you in a minute. Welcome back to the Lembit Opic Show. We're still with Dr. Teck Kong, who doesn't have tech issues anymore, but he does have a very clear insight into something which many of our viewers are talking about, which is the way that we were treated as a gigantic human experiment all over the world during the COVID lockdowns and more worryingly still, the jabs. Let me read some of the messages before I go back to Dr. Kong. I know somebody who has had the complete gamut of jabs and boosters. When I asked why they're still getting them, she said, well, they keep sending for me. That's from Hemingway. I know somebody who did the same thing, an elderly lady who just trusted that she had to get them. Sunday Girl said, my partner was delivering to hospitals. They were totally empty. Holly says, massive incentives going on for sure. GPs have become drug pushers and nothing else. Rampant prescribing. I won't be able to get through all the messages here, but 3 more. Madrid says, not vaccines. They were made a long time before the pandemic and COVID. And just a bloke asked question says, I was in hospital 2 weeks ago. Police have had a number of chats behind the blue curtain, revealing that a good many NHS frontline staff are aware of the harms of these jabs. Without that frontline support, I doubt TPTSB will get away with it again. And Mingling says, bearing in mind, for history purposes, the changed definition of vaccines to fit the COVID one. Many messages, all equally good, but I don't want to waste the opportunity to speak with Dr. Kong here. Incidentally, Dr. Kong, Hidden Truth says you are a fantastic guest. So people are really listening to what you have to say, Dr. Kong. Let's end on a note of action in the next quarter of an hour or so. We know the problem, or at least understand the problem. There was mass testing on the public. There was censorship. According to some of the chat, there was the threat of criminal action against doctors who dared to stand up against this monolith. How do we get out of this to the kind of uplands that you're describing in terms of medical independence and responsibility?
Well, let me first and foremost, we must make sure that we do not vote these political parties into office again. They must not be forgiven for the duress they place our population under and the risk. You know, when I saw my first 15-year-old healthy boy, never a history of anything wrong with him, coming after his football training with his mother, 15 years old, getting chest pain, getting short of breath. That was my first case of myocarditis. In fact, he was about to be discharged by the nurse practitioner in casualty. And this is also another aspect of our dumbing down. Now, no other doctor would have held that child back. The nurse came to see me and says, I put this to your colleagues, and they said, oh, it's okay to discharge as musculoskeletal, chest pain, and send the patient and ask the patient to come back if there was anything else untoward developing. I said to the nurse, I said, look, if you're concerned at all, I know you've done the ECG, oxygen saturation, chest X-ray, and all that sort of thing. Do a troponin and do a CK, creatine kinase, and do a D-dimer. Some 3 basic tests which I use when I suspect something not right cardiovascularly with a patient. And you know, the troponin came back 10 times above normal. That is a marker of cardiac damage. And I had to tell the nurse, we send this boy straight to the cardiac center across the city. Now, people might quote a lot of my more illustrious colleagues might have done analysis of data and so on and reported on them. I only need to be at the front line to see one case, never mind the other cases that I've seen, but the first case that I saw of such horrendous effect put me into a very angry mode. We should never, ever give this to our children. Yeah, they're doing this to our children all the time. It is most unforgivable. What I want to do with the Alliance on Democracy and Democracy and Freedom is to actually encourage independence and all like-minded people up and down the country to vote independence and vote for ADF so that we have a change in the complexion of the parliament. We need to get errant MPs out of the chamber and put decent ones in, people who care about the country, people who want to serve the nation. You cannot change policy by marching up and down the street, by petitioning. In fact, some petitions are not even discussed in the House. Sorry, Lembit.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm finding what you're saying really interesting. I was going to say this, first of all, in brackets, I marched with 2 million other people through London against what I believe to have been an illegal war in Iraq, but they still went in and did it.
Exactly.
I was regarded as the pariah. Myself and my then, I thought, honourable political party with a very honourable leader, Charles Kennedy, we were condemned because we didn't want to have that war in Iraq. It turns out we were right. So I'm very pessimistic about the impact of marches. On the positive side, your organisation, is it a political party or is it a movement that seeks to find candidates from across the political spectrum?
Well, we thought movements will have no political clout because the legislature makes all these policies. So I suggested that we should try and field as many candidates, independent candidates, as possible. Cognizant of the fact that we're not well funded, we are a very young party, although the people behind the scenes are very accomplished politicians. So what we thought was we would appeal to all sorts of people with real life experience, people with a commitment, a very fervent commitment to serve, to step forward, and we'll give them all the logistical support they need. We chose the title very carefully. We chose the term alliance because we are aware that there are a lot of smaller parties who share our views, that we need to protect our freedom, we need to restore our democratic principles. So the word alliance is in itself very totemic. Democracy and freedom speaks for themselves. We are being subordinated. I mean, you remember how the EU became more and more tyrannical in its ways, and we had to get out of it, and we're not fully out of it yet. So we need to encourage people to take part in the political process. So one of the things we need to do is to encourage people to vote. Not to vote is not an option, and we have to vote errant MPs out of Parliament. Mm-hmm. To come back to health, it's a very important aspect of life. If you haven't got health, if you don't have health, you can't make a living to feed your family. You can't achieve all your endeavors. So I think it's very important. We were blessed with a National Health Service with superb ideals, unimpeachable principles, and we should go back to the principles and look after our citizens. And if we look after people's health, they can then produce the sort of economy that we should be able to achieve. And we as a country, I mean, you only have to look back at the days of, at the height of the British Commonwealth. We should achieve the ascendancy we deserve. We have lost the thrust in our global standing. I mean, I was only looking last night at the railway situation. We're pioneers of rail transport, and we're now being overtaken by legion countries. China has a superb rail system, but they were never anywhere close to our system. We have innovators in health, inventions, discoveries, and so on, but we've lost them. We must bring back our cutting edge in all these fields. So the first thing is we must address this politically, because the politics is holding us back, and that's my view. We need to free the people with an environment that allows them to achieve their endeavors. We're not doing that at all. As far as health is concerned, I think we owe it to our people to look after them, because they pay taxes. A lot of money has been spent in health. I mean, I remember the time when the Conservative Party was voted out, the spend was 37 billion. When the Labour Party went out, it was 120 plus billion. And now it stands at well over 200 billion, and we're getting a rubbish service, really pathetic service. You only have to step out of this country to realize how poor the service is. We have a general practice system where you can't even get to see your GP, and if you do, you think you see a GP, but it could be advanced care practitioner, it could be a locum. Everything that we stood for, everything that the NHS was good for, or promises to be, is totally destroyed. We have to restore all the values in our professionals. We have to put our country back on track. And I see no other way. I see no other way apart from correcting the political situation.
I had Piers Corbyn, who is standing for Mayor of London, on my show yesterday, a brother of the former leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. And he's often made fun of. He's described as a crank and an outsider. And the temptation of those who disagree with the kind of position you're taking, Dr. Kong, is to dismiss you, to make what are called ad hominem attacks against the person rather than against your message. It would be very difficult to question your professional competence to make these points. And it would be very difficult to claim that you have a vested interest in sticking your head above the parapet and making these points. How is your message received in the medical community?
I don't really know, to be honest. When the first cardiovascular complications were reported in the press, predominantly from AstraZeneca, and it was suspended for a very short time, I wrote to the chair of the CCG, of which I was a board member, and I was very quickly shut down. He said, "We don't need your input. We don't need your inquiry. We have the MHRA." So that is the level of fear among my colleagues, and that is the tyranny of people who run key departments in the NHS. They're all bought into a narrative from which they can't deviate. And I think it's very sad, and it's absolutely pathetic that we as professionals cannot be advocates of our patients. It's a really sad day for me to look back at the years of my service being ruined by authorities that have no compunction at all in crushing the profession's desire to serve the patients in their charge. It's very sad.
I feel the same as you do about two sectors: politics itself, which is now populated by that second-class category of people who want to be politicians more than they want a particular outcome. And the other group that worries me is a journalistic sector, which seems to collude with those politicians for the sake of an easy life and self-promotion. Is it possible? Right. Is it possible that what we're seeing here is a concerted attempt to control us, to actually take over our thought processes and essentially create this kind of totalitarian system that the far-sighted George Orwell predicted?
Undoubtedly, Lembit. What it is, these people who seek control, power for the sake of it, they have seized the moral high ground. So anything you say, as you say, you're being attacked. I'm being attacked all the time. And the thing is, I work on the principle that I will never give up and never give in, because if my motives are honorable and sincere, I will stand and fight, because I know there will be people benefiting from it. There are people within my family circles, within my friendship circles, and I owe it to this country to serve it. As a bit of history, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in a distant part of the British colonies, but I'm very fervently patriotic, and nothing can change that. So I want to serve this country as a politician with humility and of integrity, as a way of gratitude, and I promise I will not fail.
Dr. Teck Hong, it's been an honor to have you on the show, and a real pleasure to hear your analysis of something which many suspected was going on, but few have your professional experience to corroborate. We'll have you back again in the near future. I wish you success, because the story you tell must be told. Millions having been affected, including myself, by the toxin, also known as the COVID jab system.